Let's talk about Starlink versus 5G LTE. Now, both Starlink and 5G LTE solutions are great for providing high-speed internet access when fixed terrestrial internet options are unavailable. But there are some distinct differences. So in this video, we're going to talk about pricing, internet speeds, and geographic flexibility to help you decide which option is right for you. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Sorting through all of the various internet and equipment options can be really confusing, but it doesn't have to be. I created Rogue Support to help people with the design, implementation, and troubleshooting of internet connections, networks, and Wi-Fi. And it's really easy to get started. Simply open up a ticket at rogue.support, describe your issue, and our friendly tech experts will reach out to get started. Our goal is to ensure that your network is running so smoothly that you never even have to think about it. So give it a shot today and visit rogue.support on the web to get started. You won't be disappointed. I want to start by talking about who this video is for, because anytime I do videos on either Starlink or 5G LTE, I inevitably get comments telling me that, the terrestrial fiber or cable that someone has at home is just so much better than Starlink or so much better than, T-Mobile home internet. So I want to start off by first saying, if you've got reliable fiber or cable internet at home, great. Use that, right? But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about remote internet, right? When you're boondocking in an RV, or if you're setting up a temporary construction site, or if you're running an event out in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have any terrestrial internet connectivity at all. That's when you're gonna want Starlink or 5G LTE. Or if you do happen to have fixed terrestrial internet, but you want a backup internet connection. So in my own network, I've got Comcast Business Cable, and that provides me almost a gig of download speeds, but it goes down sometimes, right? So I use T-Mobile 5G home internet as my backup connection. And that way I can always stay online, and this backup internet costs me about $30 a month, which is well worth the cost of staying connected all the time. So let's start by breaking down 5G and LTE solutions. 5G internet is delivered through cellular networks by connecting you to a nearby cell tower. You can connect to these cellular networks in a number of different ways. You can use a 5G modem like this one from T-Mobile Home Internet. And while I personally use T-Mobile Home Internet, most of the other cellular providers here in the US also have similar 5G options such as AT&T and Verizon. You can also use 5G LTE through mobile hotspots or through third-party routers. Now, we've done videos on routers with SIM card slots from both Peplink and GLINet right here on the Crosstalk Solutions YouTube channel, and both of those options are great for multi-WAN remote deployments. One of the nice things about using 5G LTE is the variety of options available, and not just in the service offerings, but also in the form factor. In my own RV, I use the Spitz AX from GLINet, and it's connected up to an external Mobile Mark omnidirectional antenna, which works great for when I'm camping, but if you're a bit further from a cell tower, you could also use a directional antenna, such as this one from Waveform, which you can use with Peplink devices, you can use it with the GLINet Spitz AX, you could even crack open your T-Mobile Home Internet modem and replace the included antenna with this one, which is much stronger, and it can be pointed in the general direction of the closest cell tower. And you can find cell towers that are close to you by using a website such as cellmapper.net, which allows you to select your carrier, and then it's going to display the 5G and LTE options near your area, which does bring up a limitation of cellular connectivity. Not all cell towers provide service for every carrier. You might have a Verizon SIM card, but you only have connectivity to AT&T cell towers. Now, we've actually worked with customer deployments where they have SIM cards from multiple different carriers to ensure that they're always using the strongest cellular provider for any given area. But this brings up one of the biggest limitations with 5G LTE internet. You have to be within range of a cell tower, and the further away you get from a tower, your connection is going to be slower and spottier and could ultimately be unusable. So next, let's take a look at Starlink. Starlink can be used practically anywhere with a clear view of the sky. It's the newest generation of satellite internet, and it works by sending and receiving data from a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. SpaceX currently has over 6,000 satellites in orbit around the planet, and those satellites relay any data sent or received from the satellite dishes to a number of ground stations that have high-speed connections to the internet. Now, the two most popular versions of Starlink for general use are the Starlink Gen 3 dish as well as the Starlink Mini. The Starlink Gen 3 dish is the larger of the two, and it's capable of higher internet speeds. Bigger satellite dish means better connectivity to the constellation of satellites in orbit, but it's also less portable and it's made for more permanent installations. The Starlink Gen 3 comes with a separate modem that provides both client wireless if you want to use the dish as a standalone solution, but it also has Ethernet ports if you want to use it as a WAN connection to a third-party router. Starlink Mini, on the other hand, is a smaller and more portable satellite dish with no separate modem. Everything, including the client Wi-Fi, is integrated right into the dish itself, but it still does have an Ethernet port for connecting out to third-party routers. Now, since this is a smaller dish, the speeds that you can get with Starlink Mini aren't as fast as what you can get with the larger version, but it's still going to be able to deliver high-speed broadband and plenty of bandwidth for most of what you'd want to do on the internet. So let's talk about the differences in internet speed, also known as bandwidth, between 5G LTE and Starlink. So typically, any 5G LTE home internet solution or SIM card is going to be backwards compatible to previous generation 4G LTE towers. So if you're within range of a tower that only has 4G, you can expect download speeds between like 5 to 50 megabits per second. With those speeds, you're going to be able to browse the web, you're going to be able to check your email, do standard office work, and maybe even stream some standard definition video or music without too much buffering. But it's really not going to be ideal for much beyond that. 5G speeds, on the other hand, typically range between 50 to 500 megabits per second, and they allow you to stream high-definition video, you can do online gaming, you can send and receive large files. With my own T-Mobile home internet, I usually see speed test results between 300 to 500 megabits per second on the download. Starlink Mini is not quite as strong with average download speeds. It ranges from like 50 to 200 megabits per second. Still plenty good for streaming high-definition video or making Zoom calls, but the difference is that the speeds are inconsistent, right? With Starlink, you're connecting to low Earth orbit satellites that are flying by overhead at over 5 kilometers per second. So your dish is continuously switching between available satellites. You can run a speed test and get like 50 megabits per second and then run it again a couple minutes later and you get 150 megabits per second, right? The speeds are not consistent at all. Now, for example, I've got a buddy who has a remote cabin and he absolutely has to be online at all times. So at that cabin, he has both Starlink as well as a local wireless ISP connection. Now, the wireless ISP provides him a solid, consistent connection of around 30 megabits per second, whereas Starlink fluctuates a lot. So because of this, we had to configure a rule in his router that basically says Starlink is the main connection for most everything, right? Like watching Netflix and surfing the web. But any Zoom calls that he does are sent through that slower wireless ISP connection so that they don't buffer and drop due to satellite inconsistencies. Now, the Starlink Gen 3 does have those same inconsistencies, but it provides faster overall speeds than Starlink Mini. It typically provides between like 100 to 400 megabits per second. So now let's talk about pricing, right? 5G LTE solutions are cheaper than Starlink. Most of the home internet providers charge you around $50 per month for the service, and even less if you're bundling that broadband service with your smartphone plan. So for me personally, I only pay $30 a month for T-Mobile home internet since it's bundled with my family's cell phones. I also have a separate like 2 gigabyte per month T-Mobile SIM card that I pay $10 a month for. Mostly I just use that for testing with like third-party routers. They do have unlimited SIM cards, but the pricing there varies greatly between carriers. But typically you can get an unlimited SIM card on a cellular plan for between $65 to $90 per month. Starlink, on the other hand, is going to be more expensive. Their Roam Unlimited plan is $165 a month, and then they also have like a $50 a month plan, but it caps your bandwidth at 50 gigabytes, and then they charge you 25 cents per gigabyte if you go over. The nice thing about these Starlink plans, though, is that you can pause them. You can turn the service on and off. So, for example, if you're on the Starlink Roam plan, but you only use it during camping season, you can disable the service through the winter months and save yourself from having to pay the monthly fee. Starlink also has a referral program, so if you get your friends to sign up using your referral link, you both get 1 month of free service. So I invite all of my friends who are watching this video to use my link down in the description to get yourselves a free month of service if you're going to be signing up for Starlink. Now, when it comes to geographic flexibility, Starlink beats 5G LTE hands down because it can work from anywhere. Whereas the 5G LTE solutions have to be within range of a cell tower that works with your particular provider. Starlink says that it requires a 110-degree clear view of the sky, but in my experience, I've set up Starlink Mini without any consideration for its line of sight to the sky or the orientation of the dish, and I've never really had any issues. I've even used both versions of the Starlink dish while driving through remote stretches of highway, again, without issue. 5G LTE devices are going to give you the best, most consistent internet connection if you're within decent range of a cell tower. Now, the further you get from a cell tower, the slower and spottier your connection is going to be, unless you set up one of those more powerful directional antennas. And then once you're completely out of range of a tower, you're basically out of luck. Hopefully this gives you some insight into the pros and cons of each type of connection so that you can make an educated decision on which way to go. Now, me personally, when I go camping in my RV, my current setup is flexible. I try to make it as flexible as possible. So I use the GL-iNet Spitz AX, which gives me some options. I can plug in my Starlink Mini via the Ethernet port. I can connect to the campground's Wi-Fi to use that as my WAN connection. And it's also got dual SIM card slots for 5G LTE as a backup. Or I can bring along my T-Mobile home internet modem and plug that into the WAN port as well. Though rumor has it, T-Mobile has started cracking down on folks that take the 5G home internet modem outside of their home area. So bottom line is that if you're near a cell tower, broadband provided by 5G LTE carriers is going to be cheaper, faster, and more consistent. But outside of the range of the towers, Starlink is pretty much your only option for high-speed internet. All right, thanks so much for watching, and if you'd like to keep this party going, I have hand-selected 2 videos on the right here for you to watch next. The top video is my original review of the T-Mobile home internet solution, and the bottom video is my full review of Starlink Mini.